The Scottish Government's being urged to backtrack on plans to ban so-called conversion therapy, aimed at changing the sexual orientation or gender identity of people who identify as LGBT+. A group of church leaders has written to the new Equalities Minister, Emma Roddick, warning the move could criminalise Christians simply for expressing their beliefs. Well, I'm joined in the studio by one of the signatories to this letter, the Reverend Dr. William Phillip from the Tron Church in Glasgow, and Blair Anderson, who's with the End Conversion Therapy campaign. Morning to you both. Thanks very much for being with us. Dr. Phillip, just explain to us why you believe that a ban on this therapy would impact on you.
Thank you. Well, I think that if this was, as it's being presented, a ban on all kinds of horrific, coercive, abusive things being done to people, there would be absolutely nobody in any way objecting to that. But it's not about that. What these proposals from the expert advisory group to the government and so on have been pushing for is actually criminalising simply things like conversation, discussion, the sort of thing that ordinary parents do day in, day out with their children, adolescents in particular, going through the confusing realities of adolescent development and so on. It's part of the same lobby that is pushing heavily for LGBT ideology in schools and in other places and so on, and that's something that people are very concerned about. It's really the other side of things like the gender recognition bill and so on, because what this is aiming to do is actually censure and silence any opposition to that, even in the home, even among parents
is it really
talking to
going
children.
That far, isn't it about actually banning the therapy itself or the practice, which many people would argue, and there are scientific studies around the world that say that actually this has no benefit whatsoever? Yeah,
and all of these coercive things are already things that are subject to criminal law. You can't assault people, you can't coerce people in that sort of way. But no, very specifically, what these proposals will encompass, because it's a very broad definition, is even conversations within the home among parents, but also simply Christian leaders or leaders of other faiths simply expressing the traditional clear teaching of that faith.
Just on conversion therapies, do you accept that, here's the American Association of Psychiatrists who say that such interventions are harmful? There is evidence to support that.
I'm sure there's evidence that there are harmful things that can be done to people, but that's not what this is about. These harmful things are already prescribed, and there's no need for this because it's a dangerous expansion of a definition which is very elastic. That's the problem.
Blair Anderson, how do you respond to that? The idea that conversations in the home, for instance, would fall under this proposed ban?
Well, there's a couple of points in there which are factually incorrect. First of all, to say that it's currently criminalised, that's not the case, because I was put through conversion therapy and have no legal recourse for it. When you're talking about criminalising conversations, that is also not the case. What we're criminalising is conversion therapy in all of its forms. Any attempt to suppress or change someone else's sexuality or gender identity, no matter how or where that takes place, that is equality under the law for everyone to be protected equally, regardless of setting. If you're concerned about parents being criminalised for teaching their children, it was one of my parents who put me through conversion therapy in the form of conversation, in the form of prayer. I ended up extremely traumatised and extremely unwell because of it. I almost lost my life at the age of 15 through suicide. I think that is worth protecting LGBTQ plus people from.
But should conversations be banned, which is the suggestion here by Dr. Phillip?
Not conversations where all parties go into it accepting that LGBTQ plus people exist, which I think is a fairly basic, fundamental thing that I would like to think that we could all agree on. Where a conversation takes place, where someone has the explicit intention or the hope or the aim or the desire to change someone's sexuality or gender, which is not possible and which is extremely traumatising, that should be banned, because banning that protects LGBTQ plus people from harm.
You mentioned that you feel as though your rights, William Phillip, might be undermined here. The Scottish Government says the legal right to freedom of religion, expression and a private and family life are protected under existing laws. Any legislation introduced in respect of conversion practices will recognise and respect these.
Yeah, I think that is not, though, the case, because the gold standard legislation, which is being held up by campaigns like Blair and by the Scottish Parliament cross-party committee itself, the gold standard is the legislation which has been brought in Australia in the state of Victoria. And let me just read to you what some of those measures are. It's become illegal and to not affirm someone's gender identity. It's illegal for a parent to refuse to support their child's request for puberty blockers. It gives example of illegal practices, as, for example, a religious leader meeting one-to-one with somebody and urging them to not indulge in sexual practices out with marriage, but to remain celibate in those cases. Those are very stringent things, and those do infringe upon the normal teaching of not just the Christian faith, but others as well. And legal counsel has said that these things will criminalise the ordinary pastoral work, for example, of churches, synagogues, mosques, and others. And that's a very drastic step to take in a democracy.
Let me ask Blair to respond to that.
First of all, my sexuality is not an indulgence. It's not something extra as a core part of who I am. Second, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Faith and Religion does not believe that a conversion therapy ban in its current proposed form would infringe on faith or religious beliefs. Neither does the Parliament's Committee on this or the Expert Advisory Group on Conversion Therapy, which includes...
Does it go as far as those proposals in Australia? And because that is clearly something that William Phillip is concerned about.
Just to reiterate, the Expert Advisory Group did include representatives of faith groups in Scotland, including the largest faith group in Scotland, who were not concerned by this. The Expert Advisory Group's recommendations make clear that there is a tension between the right to religious belief and the right to safety, privacy and respect for LGBTQ plus people. In almost all human rights cases, there is a tension between competing rights. What the report makes clear is that because of the extreme and profound harm which is put on LGBTQ plus people, there must be restrictions on what can be undertaken if that is intending to change someone's sexuality or gender identity.
But does it concern you that if it goes that far that it actually affects the rights of Christians?
Well, what concerns me now is that by not doing anything, we're infringing on the rights of LGBTQ plus people to live.
But we're also needing to recognise that there are many children, many adolescents, teenagers in schools who are being put under very great pressure by the LGBT lobby.
That's not true.
Is there evidence for that?
That's not true.
I've spoken to parents of, and I've spoken to youngsters who have been made to feel a great pressure because many of their friends are now wanting to identify as something different, identify as trans, identify as non-binary and so on. And there's a very great pressure.
And you would deny them that?
Well, they go home if they want to go home and talk to their parents, and their parents, normal people, ordinary people, are being faced with this all the time, and there's a very great pressure. And for parents to be able to talk to their children and discuss these things, and yes, say to them, no, there's nothing wrong with you.
Do you accept that some children can't speak to their parents for lots of reasons?
Well, of course, but parents are the primary ones who have the right and the responsibility in the eyes of the state and in the eyes of God to care for their children. Now, that doesn't allow them to abuse children, of course not. But the danger here is that they will be not just censored but threatened with criminality. I mean, there are very severe penalties. In the Australian legislation, you can be in prison for 10 years or fined £100,000.
But the Scottish Government say that when you talk about criminality, that is not the case. That is not what's going to happen with this legislation.
Yes.
Well, but that is what has happened in Australia, and that is being held up as the gold standard. And so that's the real problem here. It's very easy to make alarmist claims and talk about extreme things which are extraordinarily rare, but bring in with that things which will threaten to criminalise vast swathes of the ordinary population.
We're not criminalising parenting, we're criminalising conversion therapy. When you say that if a child comes home and thinks that they might be trans and your parent's allowed to say, oh, there's nothing wrong with you, I really resent the implication that there's something wrong with being trans or gay either. When you're talking about responsible parenting, do you think it was responsible parenting when I came out as gay and was told that wasn't an option and ended up suicidal at the age of 14? Do you think that's responsible parenting?
Well, I can't comment on that situation. But I mean, if somebody is being abused and coerced and so on,
well, that's not true either, because the report makes clear that it's not possible to consent to conversion therapy, and that's especially true when you're a child. As a child, your parent has a responsibility to care for you and protect you, and that includes protecting your health. Mm-hmm. If someone says that you shouldn't be trans, you shouldn't be gay, and I'm not going to respect that, that does cause really profound harm to them.
But aren't parents ultimately the best judges of their own children?
I think children are the best judges of their own children. Parents have responsibilities, but they are not master of their children. They don't own their children. Their children exist. My parent tried to stop me from being gay. They thought that was the responsible thing to do.
Well, all I can say is that when I was a child, I had all sorts of wrong ideas about all kinds of things. Unfortunately, I had loving parents who helped nurture me through that and teach me right and wrong.
But did you grow up trans, for instance? Do you fully understand what a child in that position goes through?
Well, there are lots of confusing things that children go through and youngsters go through. And if parents,
so you're suggesting that all trans people are just confused, that all gay people are just
confused?
No, but I'm saying that there are a lot of people who are confused, and everybody knows that adolescence is a time of discovery and finding out. And if people are being put under great pressure because they're being told that all the problems, all the anxieties, all the issues that might have in their life might be solved by the fact that they just need to discover that they're actually got a different sexuality.
That's never
the answer to that may very well be no. You're just going through a phase of life. Okay, and ordinary parents know that, and they want to be able to help their children.
The final word on that.
The idea that sexuality is a phase, I thought had been consigned to the 80s, but apparently not. This will not criminalise parents, this will not criminalise prayer, this will criminalise conversion therapy. Nothing more, nothing less. If someone is trying to change or suppress or deny someone else's sexuality or gender identity, that should be against the law.
Gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed for your time this morning. That's Blair Anderson, who's with the End Conversion Therapy campaign, and the Reverend Dr. William Phillip from the Tron Church in Glasgow.